This is one of my two favorite clips here of Tim Walz so far. This congressman represents Minnesota. So these two clips right here of Governor Walz are not getting nearly enough attention. So he was criticized for saying that the rest of the state, outside of Minneapolis, St. Paul, is it's where the rocks and the cows are. Just there's no people out there. It's just rocks and cows, which I find demeaning. But it's in the same vein. These people are deplorables, right? It's the same thing as deplorable.
Okay, he's right.
So he was caught saying that. It was at a like one. You know what it was? Speaking of Mitt Romney's 47%, it's the same thing. It was taking an event like that with someone's cell phone like under the chair, and they caught him saying it. And then he was called out for it on the sidewalk by some guy. And here's what he said.
There are people that think Greater Minnesota is rocks and cows, and they are wrong. Because it is so much more than that.
Well, why would
they cut it.
Say that?
And he's like, "Oh, I didn't say it. I was saying that that's wrong. There are other people who say it's nothing but rocks and cows, but I disagree with them. That's what I was saying." All right, well, here's the actual clip.
You know, you see those maps, red and blue, and there's all that red across there, and Democrats go into depression over it. It's mostly rocks and cows that are in that red area.
Congressman Pete Stauber represents those rocks and cows. Congressman, how are you, sir?
Good morning. I listened to that comment, and it's just despicable that Tim Walz calls Greater Minnesota and Greater America rocks and cows.
And it's right there. Even though he says, "Oh no, I was saying it's not rocks and cows." You're like, no, obviously you were, and of course you truly do believe that. What do we need to know about Tim Walz? You know the man. You live there.
Yeah. So. First off, this pick is the most dangerous, far left, radical socialist ticket that the United States of America has ever seen. Tim Walz he's a very extreme governor. If you look at all the laws that he signed in and supported, I mean, we went from a $19 billion. That's what it'd be, $19 billion. Surplus to a $10 billion tax increase the very next year, and he expanded our state government by 40%. This is a governor that wants to make Minnesota a sanctuary state. This is a governor that gave driver's license illegal immigrants driver's license to vote. Free health care to illegal immigrants, free college to illegal immigrants, putting feminine products in both boys and girls' bathrooms as young as fourth grade. This is an extreme, just a very extreme ticket.
The tax increases. Speak about that for a minute, because I don't think we have enough. And then last hour of the show, we talked a lot about the economy. And raising taxes sure doesn't help.
Yeah, so I will just tell you that the $19 billion surplus, Tim Walz told every Minnesotan that you will be getting a $2,000 tax rebate check. Every tax-paying Minnesota, you'd get a $2,000 tax rebate check. Never happened, and he said that on a campaign trail.
Wow.
So again. Walz is, you have to watch what he does, not what he says, just like the Harris-Biden ticket. When we talk about Harris-Biden, Biden-Harris, it doesn't matter at this point that Harris is the candidate. She is, I say it's the same car, different driver, and picking Tim Walz is a perfect radical fit for him to sit in the back seat of that car.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, because some people are saying that, well, listen, the VP pick doesn't matter, so why are you spending so much time talking about Tim Walz? What does that have to do with Kamala? What do you say to that?
Well, I think that it has to do with decision-making. Tim Walz right now, we know that, and we respect his service in the Minnesota Minnesota National Guard, Army National Guard. We respect that. But he stole valor when he stated that his retirement position was command sergeant major. He knew that was wrong, and he knew it was wrong to say that he carried weapons in war. He never was in war. That's stolen valor. The American people are thankful for every service member's years of service. But what I'm talking about, and the American people and Minnesotans are talking about stolen valor. He misled Minnesotans and the American people. He lied to Minnesotans and the American people about his service record. That is the definition of stolen valor. And I can tell you that I think the Harris campaign, the vetting team, probably has been fired by now because of that. Tim Walz owns the stolen valor, and the American people now know what type of individual he is. And I think that goes to the character. I think that goes to the character when you lie about your service. Stolen valor.
Yeah. It's there's been so much. It's been like 3 days or something since he was announced vice president, and every day there's more stuff coming out. It's like, oh geez, did you vet this at all? Like this is like awful stuff.
Let me tell you something. Let me tell you something real quick for your listeners. Obviously, you're well aware of the riots in 2020. Tim Walz sat like a deer in the headlights for 3 days as Minneapolis burned to the ground. It's like the second most devastating riot, other than I think the '92 riots in L.A. Millions and hundreds of millions of dollars of damage, and Tim Walz called it, quote, these are his words, righteous anger, end quote. The Minneapolis mayor was begging for him to get the National Guard out, and then his excuse for not putting the National Guard out was what? Tim Walz described the Minnesota National Guard at that moment as, quote, just a bunch of 19-year-old cooks, end quote. That is offensive.
What does that mean? What does that mean? What did he mean by that? Like they were like inexperienced?
You have to ask him. He described the Minnesota National Guard after we asked him, why didn't you bring the National Guard on hour one? And he says, what? They're just 19-year-old cooks. He described.
Here he is. Let me play it. I haven't heard this before. Let me play it. Here it is right here. Hold on, I got to press unmute. Here it is.
That mean? I think to the mayor,
the
mayor knew what he was asking for. He wanted the National Guard, and what does that mean? I think to the mayor, yes, I think it's a perception. I'm certainly not questioning that. I think the mayor said, I request the National Guard. Whew, I'm out. This is great. We're going to have massively trained troops. No, you're going to have 19-year-olds who are cooks in some cases. And what are we going to do, and how are we going to use them?
Well, let me tell you something. That is extremely offensive. And Tim Walz has been shielded by a friendly media. In fact, one of the major media outlets, newspaper media outlets, one of the higher ups has worked on his campaigns. He's been shielded. And let me tell you something. My wife served 23 years in the Minnesota Air National Guard. She retired as the first command chief in the state's history at the 148th Fighter Wing F-16 unit, and she deployed to Iraq. What Tim Walz said and described to the service members of the Minnesota National Guard was despicable, calling them, quote, only 19-year-old cooks. And very, very frustrating. And I can tell you that people in Minnesota, when they're hearing this, literally for the first time, they're disgusted because he has been shielded. Let me tell you something. In the last election, Tim Walz was soundly rejected in greater Minnesota, soundly rejected. And I'm telling you, America's going to reject him too. And that goes to the Kamala Harris decision-making.
Steve Grove is the guy who runs the Minnesota Star Tribune, who you're speaking of. If anyone wants to search up Steve Grove, who used to work in Walz's not only campaign but cabinet as well, and just waltzed right over to the main newspaper in the state. Of course, is only going to get friendly coverage. It's wild. But on the National Guard, isn't that the same National Guard that he was a member of in the stolen valor in question? Isn't that the same National Guard that he deployed to Italy with, or is that a different National Guard?
It certainly could have been. He was in Governor Walz was in the National Guard in a unit in southern Minnesota. So I'm not. I guess
it's wild because he's like the stolen valor is the one aspect of it, and that's bad enough. But then the insulting of the National Guard at the same time, it's like you could. That's either of those are bad, but he's doing both.
Let me tell you something. He assaulted when he said that every National Guard member, and furthermore, why would you put down a 19-year-old cook? Because guardsmen need men and women serving them in time of need.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, it's despicable and it's outrageous that we're finding this, all of this, we're finding it out right now, and America is too. You know, we knew it in Minnesota, but he was shielded. It's very, very offensive, and we're looking at Kamala Harris is looking at him. I mean, can you imagine Tim Walz having to make an immediate decision? He failed leadership in 2020 when he sat for 3 days. Minneapolis has not been the same. 40% of the Minneapolis cops are gone because of that. Their retention, recruitment, morale is down. When you make a decision to let the 3rd precinct in Minneapolis burn down, it's offensive. And we need leaders that support the men and women in blue and understand that safe, secure communities are prosperous and hopeful communities. I can tell you this: there was a state trooper who's now retired. When he was leaving that riot zone, he said that about a 4 or 5 year old boy and a mother holding like a 3-month or 4-month-old child, that young boy came up to him, pulled on his pants, and begged him not to leave his neighborhood. That trooper said he'll never, ever forget that, and he has seen a lot in his life. This is how bad it was, and Tim Walz failed when Minnesota needed him the most. For 3 days, let Minneapolis burn, and it's still not the same.
Okay, my last question for you. All that being true, how did he get reelected? Again, in 2022, against Scott Jensen, who, by the way, won Tim Walz's congressional district that he used to represent by 8 points. So the people outside of Minneapolis rejected him. So maybe the question is, how did Minneapolis get so wacky? But all you just said is true, yet still he won re-election again, which leads many to be concerned that he could still win this race as well on a national level.
Well, let me try to explain this to you. In greater Minnesota, if you just take Minneapolis, St. Paul, Hennepin, and Ramsey counties, those are the bluest counties. Every other county, for the most part, he got destroyed in, because when you denigrate greater Minnesota, you've denigrated the heart and soul of Minnesota. And when you denigrate rural America, you denigrate the heart and soul of America, because America was built by our small town communities and the heroes that live within them. And so I think that this next election, Minnesotans now see what our governor did, what our governor said, the stolen valor on him. He owns that. He can't get out of it. You see his campaign now that Biden-Harris campaign has changed his rank because he was called out on it.
Yeah. Yep. And they would have gotten away with it. They have. Pete Stauber represents the cows and the rocks in the northeastern section of Minnesota. Congressman, thank you for your insight. Appreciate you.